Private notice question on Post Office Historical Matters Compensation. Lord Arbuthnot.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask a question of which I have given private notice. The question is as follows: to ask Her Majesty's Government whether the £685 million set aside for the Post Office Historical Matters Compensation Scheme will cover those claimants involved in the litigation who were not convicted or prosecuted, as well as sub-postmasters whose convictions have been overturned.
My Lords, the Government has indeed set aside up to £685 million to support the Post Office in paying compensation to postmasters with quashed Horizon-related convictions. The Post Office reached a settlement to pay compensation of £42.75 million plus costs in 2019 with a further group of postmasters. The Post Office has separately set up the historical shortfall scheme to provide compensation to postmasters who suffered Horizon-related losses but were not convicted or prosecuted and were not part of the GLO.
My Lords, Fujitsu knew that it could and did alter the accounts of sub-postmasters without the knowledge of the sub-postmasters. It knew that the government was denying that that could be done. It knew that the sub-postmasters were being prosecuted for those altered accounts. Is it not high time and beyond that Fujitsu began to become part of the solution rather than being part of the problem?
The Noble Lord makes an important point, of which I know many in the House will have some sympathy, but I think it's important that we await the outcome of Sir Wyn Williams' inquiry. We all have our suspicions about this and we all have our views, but the reason that the inquiry has been set up is to provide us with definitive answers to questions such as the very good one that the Noble Lord has posed.
It's about a third, or fewer than a third, of the applications, the 2,500 applications, have been dealt with so far. And this is a pattern, my Lords. We saw it with Windrush. First there is a campaign, then there is a big political announcement. Money is apparently made available, and then everything grinds to a halt. This is bureaucracy standing in the way of settling personal tragedies. So can the Minister go back to his department again and get things moving?
I think the Noble Lord, if I have to say, I think it's being a little unfair. I mean, he refers to a third of it. It depends which one of the cases he's talking about. There's a number of different aspects to this. There's those who had their convictions overturned, and most of those have already received £100,000 in interim compensation. But on top of that, there's the historic shortfall scheme, which is proceeding as fast as we can. The reason that we set this up is to precisely avoid long delays through litigation, and obviously the process itself is managed through the Post Office and their advisers, but I will certainly take his message back. Nobody wants to see this drag on too long.
My Lords, I'd like to return to the point made by the Noble Lord Arbuthnot on this, because it seems quite wrong to me that a company that knew what it was doing, knew that the kit was faulty, knew that there were mistakes being made, has not been involved in this case. They should be making payments into the government so that the government can fully compensate all of those who've been wrongfully imprisoned, who've been charged within this scheme, and who have suffered years of life-destroying consequence as a product of that. My Lords, that company must be held responsible, and the government should make sure that that's the case.
I think both the Noble Lords who raised this matter make an important point, and I very much hope that those who were judged to be responsible will be held accountable. But I do think it's important to wait for the outcome of the independent public inquiry that has been launched and is proceeding before we apportion blame.
My Lords, may I follow up on this question? The two questions that are being asked, and that isn't it extraordinary that years and years have passed since this came to light, that people's lives were completely ruined by what happened, and now the government is having to put forward this huge sum of money, and yet nobody from the post office has been held accountable for what happened.
I think it's beyond extraordinary if I can disagree slightly with the noble lord. The whole situation is tragic, appalling. There are numerous words that we could use to describe the depth of the suffering of so many people, and financial compensation will never put right what went wrong. But again, we all think we know who was responsible and where the blame lies. The reason that the public inquiry has been established and is proceeding is so that we can get a full account. We already have partial accounts through the various High Court cases that have proceeded. The importance of the inquiry is so that we can get a full account of exactly what happened over many years through different regimes of government and people of leadership of the Post Office, and blame can be apportioned in the right way.
Some of these postmasters who live in Northern Ireland, whose lives and livelihoods have been destroyed by the actions of this particular internet scheme, owned, I suppose, by Fujitsu. Could the noble Lord the Minister ensure that Fujitsu, as my noble friend and as the member opposite has already outlined, are held responsible and accountable for their actions that have left many lives destroyed and people who have been financially destroyed as well?
Of course, it's not just in Northern Ireland, throughout the whole of the United Kingdom, people who've been financially, emotionally, criminally destroyed by this case, and no words that we can utter here can minimise the terrible suffering and distress that has gone on. But again, I'm sorry to be practical and hard-headed about this, but we have to return to the central point. We all think we know where blame lies. Let's wait for the results of the inquiry. By all means, in the meantime, get on with paying compensation to those who suffered, but let's have a proper inquest at the end of the inquiry when we have the full result of exactly who was to blame.
My Lords, I would like to congratulate my noble friend, Lord Arbuthnot, and all involved in their persistence and tenacity in pursuing this egregious injustice. And also I'm delighted that the government has set aside money to at least start to address these issues. Could my noble friend, though, tell the House or reassure the House whether those who have been affected will be fully compensated, including for the legal costs that they have incurred? Obviously, no money can offset the emotional and psychological damage that this has done, but I understand that there are concerns that some of those who have had to go through the courts may end up financially still worse off as a result.
Well, I certainly join my noble friend in paying tribute to the work of Lord Arbuthnot, both in this place and in the other place, as well, to be fair, as a number of members on all sides of the House who drew attention over a number of years to this slowly unfolding catastrophe. So, yeah, it's an excellent example of some great work done by parliamentarians on this issue. With regard to my noble friend's question, yes is the answer. The legal costs are covered as part of the payments.
My Lords, I'm wondering, while we await the results of the inquiry, if the government would remove Fujitsu from its preferred suppliers, tendering for government contracts pending the result of that inquiry.
I don't know whether they are still on tender lists or are indeed still being the subject of any government contracts, but I will certainly find out and write to the noble lord on that.
My Lords, I have several times urged my noble friend to put a terminal date on this. He talked about the slowly unfolding tragedy, and he's right, but it's a slowly ending tragedy as well. Of course you must have the inquiry, but can we please set a date, and I've suggested before the end of June, when this will be resolved and people will get their due deserts.
Well, I would like to agree with my noble friend, because obviously I'd like to see this all end as much as possible. When I said slowly unfolding, I meant that the revelations of the whole scandal came out over many years as a result of a number of different stages of parliamentary action, of legal cases, etc. But I can assure my noble friend that we are keen to bring this to a resolution as quickly as possible in terms of compensation. But there are a number of different aspects to it, as I explained in my reply to Lord Fox, that many postmasters are still in the process of having their convictions overturned. And that process is ongoing, as well as the progress of the historical shortfall scheme, which we have deliberately designed to try and avoid costly, long drawn-out legal proceedings.
Message from the